I had to click the got it thing. Got it. I got it. Right. So I shared this Eleanor Burkett article on Facebook, and that was actually the beginning of my realization that gender ideology had become a thing, and that everybody fancied themselves an ally now, and that all of my experience with trannies and gender nonconforming and being a San Francisco weirdo in the past had no bearing on today. And that I was just called transphobic for sharing that article. And I was like, what is going on? That was the beginning. But anyway, Eleanor Burkett, I knew her from before because a couple decades ago, she wrote a book about being child-free. And it was called The Baby Boon. And how policies favored, policies were natalist, and how child-free people kind of got screwed by American policies.
Well, that's really interesting. I've never heard of her, but it's interesting how these topics end up dovetailing.
Yeah, well, everything. I think if you're
everything becomes gender. Sorry.
Oh, well, being a child-free woman is extremely gender nonconforming. That's like one of the most gender nonconforming things a woman can be, is not wanting to have children. So I think that those of us that haven't wanted them maybe we had some experience being outliers.
Jennifer, I thought you were humming in agreement for a moment. It was
oh, well. No, that's my dog being very mean to my puppy.
Well, it is Monday, March 11th, and this is our 59th episode of Solid Ground, and we are joined today by Nina Paley. So nice to have you, Nina. You are one of the hosts of the Heterodorx podcast with Corinna Cohn, and the way you always introduce it is "Hello, turfs and trannies," which I think is awesome. It's really, there's some delicious irony in that little friendly greeting. And you describe yourself as a canceled artist.
Yes.
And your art is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so. I was just saying before we got on, we don't know, we didn't really have a topic specifically, but so many things came up just in the little chat. Like, I want to ask you about cancellation, and I want to, but something that came up early on was the white guilt, the idea of white guilt. I think I made the comment that when I first started having these social justice ideology conversations, a lot of it was around race. And now gender is has come in and taken up the whole room. And you said, no, I feel like race is definitely still there, and it feels almost more untouchable in some ways. So that's something interesting. And then the child-free thing, antinatalism, child-free women as gender nonconforming, that's a really interesting thing as well. So I'm just excited to see where the conversation goes. And Deborah, do you want to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground? Yes, I will read our
little intro now that I finally always know where it is on my phone. Okay. So Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 a month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Well, and in the chat, we have some folks already. 97 cents. Hi, Helena. Hello. Sinin Kari, greetings from Finland. Well, thank you for joining us.
Cool.
And Paul McAuliffe is here. Hi, Paul. Hank Offlameo says, did I find the feminist panel yet? I don't know.
Not bad.
Elizabeth Sorley says, hi, watching you from Norway. So great to have you guys with us. Good morning, all, or whatever time of day it is for y'all. So where to go first? Child-free? White guilt? Who feels guilty for being white?
People not having children
Not
because they're
me.
white and they feel too guilty to have more white children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a new layer.
That's
Trying to see
real
if there was an
guilt.
intersection of two sets. No.
Yeah. Intersectionality at its finest.
Doesn't
Yeah,
Kamala
well-
Harris like Venn diagrams? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so I have like your standard issue American white guilt. When BLM first arose, which I guess was in the St. Louis suburbs, right? There was, I forget who got killed, but there were these marches on police brutality. This was, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago, more than that. It was before the pandemic. And I thought, like, good, white cops are killing poor innocent Black people all over the place, and it's, look how they get away with that, and it's systemic racism, and I'm opposed to that, and go Black Lives Matter. And I did not feel very comfortable when I got exposed to some data, to some actual evidence that had me questioning that. But I did in like 2001, whenever this essay first came out, I read in Harper's The Age of White Guilt and the Disappearance of the Black Individual by Shelby Steele. I don't know if you all have read that essay, but I read it.
No, Shelby.
Yeah, I read it because I subscribed to Harper's and I thought it was a really good essay. And I remember asking friends to read it and they said they wouldn't because Shelby Steele's a conservative. And so I was just sort of alone, but I was like, this is really good writing. This is really thoughtful and interesting. So I always had that, even though I had white guilt, like I knew that I had white guilt when I read this article. He explained what white guilt is. And it's like, yeah, I have that. So as things have developed, I simultaneously knew that I had white guilt, but the white guilt has been stronger than any critical part of me for most of this time. I did notice with the trans stuff that the gender stuff really appealed to guilty white people. It was like a get out of white guilt free card. It was like bundled with race, right? So it's like, if you white liberals have racist anxieties about being racist, you can discharge that by elevating trans voices. Like, you get the same credit for that. And I thought that's one of the reasons these people are running to it, is because they, liberals just have all this anxiety and guilt and they want to discharge it, which is what Shelby Steele wrote about. And then more recently, I guess Shelby Steele's son made a movie called Who Killed
Michael Brown.
What killed Michael Brown?
What killed Michael Brown? That's a great movie.
Yeah. So I watched that, and there was a part of me that died a little bit watching it, which was the part of me that was clinging to the mythology that sustains this. It is very uncomfortable. It's not that uncomfortable for other people. So I'm not saying that I'm like a slave to my white guilt or anything like that. I'm recovering, but it's deep. Yeah, I'm really scared to be a bad person when it comes to race. I'm not scared to be a bad person when it comes to gender, because I have firsthand direct experience with lots of trannies. I had sexual relationships with a couple. I had lots of friends. The insult transphobic just does not stick to me. But I do have anxiety about race because, especially since I moved back to Illinois, most of my friends are white. I just do not have a lot of non-white friends. And I did in New York, but I'm not in New York anymore. And yeah, it's I don't have like the solid experience where I can, I just have this anxiety from when I was a child. Like, why don't you have more Black friends? Like, what is it about you? Yeah, so I have an insecurity about that.
I'm curious, in your family, was that something, were you given certain messages as a child around how to deal with race or how to relate with people who are Black, or was there anything kind of put in there, or were you just picking up in the general surroundings and zeitgeist?
Both. My father was the mayor of my town, and my parents were upstanding Democrats who did lots of fundraising and organizing. And literally one day, my father asked me when I was a little kid, do you have Black friends? Why don't you have more Black friends? And I think probably because at his work or something, this was discussed and he was hoping for a photo op or something. But I was like, no. And I do remember in grade school being sat down for a performance, and a whole bunch of students came out and like singing songs they had been rehearsing and stuff. And I was like, why did they get to leave classes and rehearse? Why did they get to do this? And they were singing We Shall Overcome and stuff like that. And it's like, well, they're Black. Like, that was when I noticed that they're Black. It didn't seem fair because I would have liked to have left classes and done something more fun like that. But I had to be taught first that racism was a thing and racism was bad. And I have memories of being taught to notice race because I was just not paying attention as a child. And things like that made me notice it and then, learn about it more. But prior to that, it was just like, we're kids. And I noticed that Black kids and white kids self-segregated. So after my father asked me that question, I was like, well, I guess I should have Black friends. And so then I would like try to make Black friends, and it was like not happening. It was like these were different social circles in the school. And I guess this was supported by or reinforced by the good liberal Urbana, Illinois teachers who had the Black students do their own fun things or whatever, do their own performance rehearsals.
Enrichment.
Enrichment, yes.
Racial enrichment.
Or the affinity groups before we called them that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe so. Now, that said, the town that I grew up in and live in today was a red line. They had redlining, super, super segregated geographically. There were Black parts of town and white parts of town, and that was by design. And clearly there was more going on than race. There was economic class coinciding with this. And we did not go to certain parts of town. So even as my father said, why don't you have Black friends? He also, if I was ever on my bike, he would say, do not go to that part of town.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But Dad, I have to go there to make some Black friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And I realized that this was a pretty segregated place, especially once I moved to New York City, because in New York City, it's totally different. It was like everybody rides the subway, everybody mixes. It was just not like this here. Like you would go places.
I've tended to think of white guilt as being kind of a middle class thing. It's a middle class white person's experience. I've never had anything like white guilt. It's always seemed really strange to me that anybody would feel guilt over race. And so when this was being pushed really heavily in the culture and in the school that I was at, I just thought this was so strange. Like how you're talking about basic social dynamics, in-group, out-group dynamics, and you're trying to pin this all on one group of people. Like this is the way it works. People group each other based on whatever similarity that they have. I grew up in a primarily Hispanic area, and there was a lot of racial bullying. And so, you know, it was just this really it wasn't cool to be white. It was absolutely not cool. My dad's stepmom is Hispanic. She's Mexican American heritage. And I used to say, well, my grandma's Mexican. It was like my get out of jail free. I'm not that white. I'm not, you know, so it's like you try to cling to anything you could to get out of being white. White was just not cool. And it was always very obvious to me that racial bullying is just a product of majority culture, you know? And so it's so fascinating when I hear people who can resonate with that concept of white guilt. It does seem, I want to ask about socioeconomic status. And, you know, it sounds like if your father was the mayor, you guys were probably doing okay, at least not impoverished, not on.
We were middle class.
Yeah, middle class. Yeah. Yeah. Jen or Deborah, did one of you say that you also can resonate with this concept?
Yeah, although I don't know if as you could sort of describe what you were just saying, I don't know if I ever held on to it like it's white guilt, but it was guilt that there were some people, I don't even know if I want to make it racial, except that I guess that's how it came, but I didn't sit there and think I'm white and that's bad, but I was thinking of, wow, there have been some differences in how people have been treated and concern about that. And I must say, even now, much as I struggle with woke things, I do sometimes, even just seeing people in other countries and parts of the world. We used to always be told when we were little, eat everything on your plate. There's kids that are starving in India or something, right? So it's like, so I grew up with a consciousness, and my family was very liberal. And so it was just super, actually I had a grandfather who was kind of bigoted, but we almost thought he was joking to get our goat anyway. So we even used to say, we would say, well, I'm going to marry someone black and we're going to give you grandchildren or whatever, right? We'd be like, so then you're going to have to deal with it. I mean, that was our way to answer that. But generally speaking, there was just this like really, I think the emphasis was like, just make sure you're being kind, like do not be unkind to people who are black, or we didn't even that many Hispanic people around. Frankly, in my town, if I remember, I think it was only by my senior year of high school that we even had a black family move into our town, and there were just 2 kids, you know, out of a 800 person high school, you know, and so it was almost more theoretical, right? It was almost more like you don't actually even see or know anybody, but just really, really make sure that you're, in some extent, going out of your like extra. I mean, that was the part where it was probably almost reverse racist. It's like, I'm going to be extra nice. I'm going to be extra just so the other person doesn't think that I'm harboring any ill whatever. I'm going to do extra as opposed to just being normal. So that was what I was just sort of raised with. And I think it's just more of I mean, now I don't want to make it even racial, but I do just have some appreciation of some people having just a better situation in their life than others, and sometimes feeling like, well, it's interesting, like how did I get into my situation I was born into and other people are in another one, and do I feel guilty? I don't like to hang on to it too long, and I try to be of service, but there is a little bit of like, wow, people get different luck of the draw.
97 cents says, did the whole panel miss out on having at least one super racist parent?
I had the grandfather.
I didn't have any racist parents. Yeah. My parents were especially my dad, pretty liberal also. And there was a lot of that promotion of thinking in that particular way, but there wasn't an opportunity to like transmit guilt around it to me because I was already living in an area where I didn't know very many white people. So in fact, I was telling him about this around the time I started making these videos about what was going on at Antioch and about the racialized training we were receiving as counselor trainees. And I started trying to talk to my father about this. And at first he didn't see, I was like, no, Dad, they're really saying this. This isn't implied. I'm not reading between the lines. They're actually coming out and saying that white women's tears are less important, or that white women are just basic bitches and Becky's. Like my teacher actually told us this. So yeah, it's actually as blatant as you think. They're not just trying to sort of tip the scale. They're really telling you that race is the most important thing about a person. And so we actually had a conversation about this. And he said, it wasn't until I was around I guess 8 or 10 years old, we drove to Kentucky. We lived in South Texas. We drove to Kentucky. His family's there. And we were at a gas station. And I said to him, why are there so many white people here? That he realized that I was not used to seeing a lot of, that I was living a different kind of racial reality to what he had grown up with. And, you know, it wasn't an issue in a lot of ways. The bullying was an issue, but I think you're going to find that anywhere. I guess what my takeaway when I kind of got old enough to sort of process a lot of this, the bullying and the experiences that I'd had as a kid, was that it really made me have empathy for someone who's a minority in any situation, because that's just the reality of in-group, out-group dynamics, is that you're going to be, if you are different, if you stand out for some reason and it's not something that's really desirable, you're an outcast. It very easily can become an outcast. So it just made sense to me that this happens. And in the United States, maybe it predominantly happens to people who aren't white, but it can happen to anybody, and it's not a product of whiteness. So that just never seemed like that seemed like a silly reductionist attitude to take.
Well, I think where it's tricky is, I mean, there are people, like, especially I had relatives also from the South too. I mean, there are people that did harbor, you know, that maybe had slaves, that did harbor certain views, and even post-slavery were still a little bit of that mindset. And they're white and we're white and they're not. But like, you weren't having that in your environment. I was in the North. I wasn't having that in my environment. But there are people that were still a bit in that mindset. So I think that, and you just had such a really interesting experience, I think, of being in at least in terms of the demographics of the entire country, right? It was like across the entire country, it's majority white, but you were in other things. I think it's so interesting, your perspective.
I'm going to say, but Leslie, the media that you got, the television shows that you saw, the magazines, the ads with women, you saw all these media representations of white women and, let's say, white supremacy, even though where you know, in your enclave, you were a minority, but you got to see different kinds of racial representation in the media that perhaps messaged to you that, you know, like associations with your skin color and success or beauty, things like that.
That's a really great counterpoint. That is one of the things that's brought up often about living in a white supremacist, systemic, racist society, that this is like, no matter where you are, you're still getting these messages that white is norm and everything else is other or exotic or, you know, less desirable. I don't have a sense that was that prevalent in my major messages from media that I recall were more about how I didn't fit in. It was like, here's the picture of the supermodels. Here's Cindy Crawford. Look how gorgeous she is. And look at you. You're just some schlubby teenager with zits. Or, you know, I remember picking up a lot of the same stuff that girls struggled with. Anorexia was going like crazy during this time. I was starving myself and I was trying so hard to be skinny. And I remember, I weighed 105 pounds and a girl in my pep squad told me I was fat. And, you know, because I told her my weight, and she's like, well, you're fat because I just got under 100. And it was like, we were just starving ourselves. Everybody was trying so hard to be. So the media messages I was receiving and taking in, you might say that there were white people. I don't know. I remember thinking I didn't have blue eyes and I was supposed to have blue eyes. And brown eyes weren't as pretty. And so there was that. I remember thinking I was supposed to be bigger chested and I was flat chested and I hated that. And, you know, I wasn't tall enough. I wasn't thin enough. So I don't know where the white hive mind was supposed to kick in and send me a message that I was really supreme here, but I was receiving more messages about not being good enough than about fitting in on this larger scale. So it wasn't something I don't remember feeling represented, but maybe I was.
It's all in the background. That's why it's unconscious bias. That's why it's systemic and you're like a fish in the water and you're not going to see the water.
But
Yeah.
see, I just see that as a numbers game, not a statement that this is what's better, because to me, it makes sense. If you are in a country where the majority of people are white, ads and media representation tend to contain and be aimed at the majority. And if you go to another country, if you visit a country on the African continent, for example, the ads and the media, you will see far fewer white people. When I was in Morocco, they lost my luggage, and I had a terrible time finding products that would work on a white person's hair. Now, this is not because of that they're practicing any kind of black or brown supremacy. It's because there are way more people that are not white there than there are white. So I just see it as a numbers game. I don't see it as an indication of supremacy or we're saying one thing's better than the other. I think it's just reflecting the reality of a population.
Well,
You
see,
know-
here's my
Go ahead.
background in action. So I spent some time in India, and in India, fairness creams
I was
were
going to bring
all
that up.
the
Yeah.
rage.
Oh, fairness creams.
Mm.
Yes, in India, that's very true.
And the
Which
lighter
is-
you were, the better.
Which is, I mean, that's really interesting too, is where does that come from? And you could say, well, because they were colonized by the British and they absorbed some kind of, internalized racism. But I mean, I don't know. Where does that preference
Well,
come from for
does-
lighter
George
skin?
South?
Doesn't it also have in countries? Who was it? It was maybe a conversation with Rob Henderson. I recently listened to him on a couple of podcasts, so I'm not sure if I'm citing this correctly, but there was a conversation about exactly this. In countries where poor people do a lot of outdoor manual labor, being pale is a sign of wealth because you can work indoors.
Yeah.
And in cultures where a lot of people do indoor stuff or northern climes, being tan shows that you can go on a lot of vacations, that you have a lot of leisure because you can sit around outside. So there's some of these that might have less to do with valuing being Anglo-Saxon, and it might have more to do with what it demonstrates about your lifestyle and your status. And so
really interesting.
where I lived in South Texas, I did not, maybe there was a lot of white media, perhaps that there was more of that than local representation. I really don't remember. I actually wasn't even allowed to watch TV very much as a little kid, not till I was older. But you definitely did not want to be white. You wanted to have a tan. You needed to be tan. It was like jokes were made about how white you were if you had pale skin. And it didn't matter if you were like a Caucasian or if you were just somebody who was presenting with pale skin, you would get mocked for that. You wanted to be as bronze as possible. Beautiful, dark, golden skin. So it's interesting.
I moved to California when I was 20, and I got a job illustrating books for use in schools, educational books from a company called ETR Associates. And they had mandates for representation of different races. And I had to draw groups of kids, some white, some black, some Hispanic. Being from Central Illinois at the time, I didn't think Hispanic was a race. I was like, this is like, what? Like, white people probably with darker hair, I guess. I was just like, what do you mean? I watched Sesame Street, and there was this character called Maria, who I just thought was really beautiful. I did not register any race thing until I came to California, and they were like, no, you have to show these Hispanic people, and they have to look different. And I was like, well, because I wasn't making them look Hispanic enough. And I was like, well, how do I make them look more Hispanic? And they're like, a cauliflower nose. Give them a cauliflower nose.
Oh my God.
Earrings and stuff. And I was like,
They said that?
Yeah. And I just was like, you totally have to learn race. It's like, if you come from a place like I came from, where there was black and white. And the fact is that there were tons of other races where I grew up, because I grew up on a university campus. And there were, like, for example, a lot of Indians and a lot of other Asians. But what we saw primarily was like black and white. And this had more to do with class, right? Because the Indians and Asians were all university professors. So, you know, they were just in the professor class and they were just professors. And people we had anxiety about were the local towny black people who lived in the neighborhoods we weren't supposed to go in. And, you know, our dads told us were a threat, even though he didn't use that language. Yeah, so I just didn't have that. And also when I was 20, I left the country for the first time. I went to Malaysia because my parents moved there for a few years. And they have very intense racial politics there with completely different races. So they basically have three major racial groups: the local Malays, the Chinese who dominate commerce, and the Tamil Indians, dark Dravidic Indians. The Indians there were on the bottom. And it was so weird for me because where I grew up, any Indians were these erudite, super educated professors. And in Malaysia, they were like the working, you know, they had like the lowest rung. Yeah. So I could tell that, like, yeah, this is arbitrary. But it may be arbitrary from place to place, but it's very real in these particular places.
Well, my daughter did she majored in Asian studies. She studied Mandarin for years, and she was over in China a couple of times as an exchange student and as a traveler. And that's another area where another example of how you are just very different. It's not white supremacy, it's Chinese supremacy, it's whatever it is, it's just where you are. Like there was a
right.
What's that?
Well, in Japan too.
Yeah, wherever the majority population is different, it's like you said about the hair products, Jen.
Yep. And I mentioned hair products because that was one of the things that was listed in that original
the backpack
paper.
You're
unpacking
your
unpacking your white privilege. I forgot the name of the woman who wrote that. Peggy, I'm blanking out on her last name.
McIntosh.
Got it. Yeah, the professor. And that was one of the indicators of white privilege, was being able to easily locate products that you need. I just think that's nonsense. And I think that's majority privilege. And, I've never experienced even the slightest hint of white guilt. I've just never experienced it. And in a way, I'm surprised I haven't, because I do suffer from inappropriate guilt at times. That is part of my, where I'm neurotic, that's kind of where my neurosis goes. But I think what I feel clear on is not being responsible for things that I have not done. So even if there's been an injustice against a particular group of people, if I haven't participated in it, I don't feel guilty for actions and things that I can't control. To me, that's codependency and is veering into something really unhealthy. It's like saying, I feel guilty that, my husband is an alcoholic and he's drinking, and if I could just change this or this about myself, maybe he'd stop drinking. And we all know that is the pathway to total insanity, getting into trying to control things you can't control. And also, I'm just really aware that all races commit injustices, interracially and extra-racially, and that it's not white people did not invent slavery. White people did not invent injustice. So the only guilt I would have would just be guilt that as human beings, I feel human guilt. As human beings, we are all deeply flawed, and we all have to be really conscious of our own motivations and our own actions so that we don't fuck up and hurt people. That's what I carry with me, is that sense of I am not perfect and I can be an ass just as quickly as the next person. So I've really got to watch myself, but I don't feel that that's related to me being white in any sense.
In the chat, Jen says, I'm very curious about a counterpoint to the majority privilege argument. If anyone has any thoughts, I'd love to know what they are and how the point is framed. Can you say more about that, Jen? I'd like to hear more about what you mean there. Yeah.
So
interesting. Go ahead, Nina.
I read in good faith an article arguing for reparations for Black people in the United States. It was this, what was the 1619 project, or what was that project? What was the thing called?
Yeah.
Was that it?
Nicole Hannah Jones.
That's
something.
it. Yeah, it was by Nicole Hannah Jones. And she talked about generational wealth, and that just according to the numbers, white people have more, they just inherit more wealth than Black people, like drastically more. So that there's a white middle class, and there's a much smaller, barely existent Black middle class. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, this is just considered normal in my world. My parents were solvent. They owned their house. Not rich, we're middle class, but I'm going to inherit money. I haven't yet, but I am at some point. And this is like normal. It's not an unusual thing to, get this, which I didn't earn just because, it's been handed down in my family. And it makes a huge difference in life. It really does. It's like the difference between living on the edge. Now, my argument with this is that there are so many poor people of other races that it doesn't make sense to focus on race to address this economic thing. But I did acknowledge that, yeah, I'm, in this respect, I'm like normal and have had a bunch of things I just haven't had to worry about because of solvent parents.
I think that's interesting. My response to that argument has always been, if you want to, if poverty is the variable that you want to manipulate that variable, not try to do it through another avenue. I mean, if you want to give people a leg up because they've been financially, I guess under whatever, they're disadvantaged, we'll use that word, socioeconomically disadvantaged, then give a leg up to the group of people and you might end up in the United States disproportionately impacting people of color with those policies. If you want to make policies that lift the floor for the lowest of the low in poverty, you might disproportionately benefit people of color, but at least you're not targeting this using some other variable that's just really a stand-in, because that proxy doesn't always make sense in every context. There's plenty of really poor white people in the US.
Tons of intergenerationally poor white people and people that worked in horrible conditions for years. And, in like steel mills and coal mines, and they've inherited, not only have they not inherited wealth, they've inherited horrible health problems and all of the things that go along with that. And, absolutely like better college funding for people who are, from less privileged backgrounds. But I just don't think that should be done on the basis of race. I've actually known a lot of Black people who have much more money than I do, and who that would really be a pisser to me if, because they have more melanin, they get a free ride in college or something, but I don't. And then the person who's in Appalachia who has absolutely nothing doesn't, because they're white. I agree. I don't think you can go by race.
It's been argued that people, especially in academia, focus on race because if they focused on class, that would pose an actual threat. Like that would actually, I don't know, there would be too much competition into their comfortable, what is it called, managerial class positions. But if they focus on race, then things will remain more or less the same class-wise.
Ooh,
finding me. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
that's That's an interesting thought. I have to sit with that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I don't know if Wilford Riley did this analysis, but he looked at this wealth situation, and I might not be getting it right, but you'll get it directionally. That a lot of this gap, if you see, you have the averages, and there's like very big difference in averages of, say, Black family wealth, white wealth, whatever. But if you actually looked at the top 10%, that's where the biggest part of the difference is. You have like the extremely wealthy white people are just really, really wealthy, and like the wealthy Black people, it's just a little bit, but that's explaining a lot of this average difference. So if you just looked at like the lower deciles, I don't know what, of white and Black, it's not that there isn't a gap, but it's just not as much. So I don't know whether that is an argument for wildly taxing the rich. I don't know, like, because like that big oomph is because there's just white people have managed to get like super, maybe that's because of the generational wealth. I don't know, but it's, if you looked at the bottom half, there's not as big a difference between white and Black. It's just the rich white people are way richer.
And that's because we Jews are white. It's a whole other thing. Like, it's like, am I white or am I off white? Because I'm Jewish. Of course, I'm very pink in color, but still.
Well, Clem 62, Clem says, I'm for free education for everyone. And I, you know what? I think that in my youth, I probably would have said something like that. But now I think I don't really want to see anybody get for free something that comes from the labor of someone else. That just creates a system of subsidies, and it's not free. It's somebody's paying for that. And then you create, what I would like to see is less administration heavy education. Gosh, it's so bloated right now. And the average undergraduate degree is now like a 5-year project instead of being a 4-year thing. So there's so much bloat, and the academic administration is just this, it's bleeding people dry. But I don't think that the solution is to make it free, because there's no such thing as free.
Yeah, I think the solution is to fix it, because back in the 70s, if a college kid worked full time over the summer waiting tables, they could earn enough to pay their way through college. There's no flipping way you could do that now. So why has the cost gone up so much? I think it is all this administration. Also, the colleges are really competing with each other to be ultra appealing to the kids. And my stepkids went to my alma mater, which is St. Mary's College in Southern Maryland. And when I went there, it was pretty bare bones. It's a very small liberal arts school. By the time my stepkids went there, it was like a flippin' luxury resort. Wow. I could not believe it. The gym, which had been like a prison gym when I was there, was now state-of-the-art luxury with a climbing wall. They had all these outdoor, gorgeous stone fireplaces for these little drunk devils. I also think it's highly debatable if college students deserve all that shit. And then, this really nice pub on campus.
Oh my gosh.
Again, with a fireplace, so that if you miss the cafeteria hours, you have someplace else to go. If I missed cafeteria hours, I was eating ravioli in my dorm room. I mean, we just didn't have all that. And that really drives up costs.
Yeah, that's crazy. The drunk devils.
It drives up costs, and it's probably, having adverse effects on the students themselves. I have noticed around here, there's all those trends happening. But also, students all have cars. They're expected to have cars.
Wow.
And they drive from place to place. Whereas in my day, we walked from class to class and place to place. And that was really good for our mental health. Not that it kept me from being insane. It didn't. But I just think I wouldn't have had a chance driving from class to class or place to place. It's such a good way to, digest the class that you've just been in. And I just think that I think that with these mental health crises on campus, including ours, that if they just took away the cars, they would see huge benefits in student mental health.
I'm surprised with all the environmental, climate worries that kids have, that they wouldn't all be on bikes or walking. Like, that's not jiving for me.
Well, they just feel guilty about it. It's just like,
oh, okay. Yeah.
It's like, oh, but I have to. Everybody says I have to.
But
and they are designing these structures so that it does feel like you have to. But that is something that the universe, if they have like all this administrative bloat, maybe some of the administrators could design the campus better.
Yeah, I remember I didn't go to college right away. I had my first child at 19 and then my second at 21. And I was being a stay-home mom and, doing other things at that time. I went back to school when I was in my mid-20s. I think I was 26 when I went back to college. Or I had taken a couple of college courses early, but didn't really get to go in earnest. And so I was older going through undergrad. I started at a community college and then I transferred to university. And I was stunned by the attitudes of the young people who were in university. So I would have been like 29. I think I graduated from college at 30 or 32. And so I was late 20s and I was a single mother and I had a job. And so it was a lot to juggle. And the attitude of the kids that I was in school with, the drunk devils is exactly the right phrase. These kids they were just goofing off. I would see their laptops would be open and they'd be on Facebook. The teacher's giving a lecture and I'm sitting there drinking every word in and writing furiously because I've got to really work hard to make sure that I'm student loans. I was taking out loans. I had a scholarship, but I was also I've got $200,000 in student loan debt that I sit with because nobody was paying my college bills. But these kids were living on campus. Parents were paying for this and they're completely taking it for granted. And I just thought it was this extended adolescence that I was watching people have this extended adolescence where they were not taking any responsibility for anything. They were just being handed something. I graduated summa cum laude, not because I was just, so brilliant or anything, but because I was the only one working. I was like everybody else is just goofing off. I was a big fish in a small pond in terms of academic responsibility because I was a little bit older. But it was really shocking to me, just culturally, that experience of being around so many people who had so much and took it for granted. I would have loved for somebody to pay for my college. That would have been great.
$200,000 in student loans. And how would you like to pay more taxes to pay reparations on top of that? Just to be provocative, just had to throw that out there.
No, I know.
You privileged ass white person, you.
I'm always trying really hard not to use myself as an example. I don't want to jump in and say, well, yeah, but I don't. But, yeah, that's true.
Just saying.
Do we have? Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
No, I had a question that might take us in a slightly different direction, but I didn't want to.
No, that's okay. Because I was just going to ask if there's time in 10 minutes to address the child-free women aspect that we never got to.
Well, I was curious about, because this is something I got sort of slammed at me this weekend, which was, I won't say who it was, but someone saying to me, why do you care so much about whether it's what kids are being taught in school or this gender thing or whatever, when you don't even have kids yourself? So I think, obviously, you've been concerned about this gender affirmation thing in young people. And I know, Jennifer, you are too. You've had stepkids. And can we answer that question about caring about children, even though we don't have any? Does anybody have an answer to that?
Yes. Number one, because you care about them because they're fellow human beings. And number two, they are the future of whatever country you're in. The kids are the future of that country. So you should care. I don't think having kids, not having kids has nothing to do with about caring for other people or caring for future generations. There's a lot of people that have never had kids that are extremely generative people that are doing a lot in the community that is going to affect people and therefore affect subsequent generations. So kids or no kids, you should care.
That's what I said. Anyway, do you have any thoughts, Nina?
Good answer.
Yeah, we're human beings. And actually there are ways that women that don't have kids can be effective in communities and contribute to society in ways that you can't if you do have kids. And that's one of the reasons I never had kids. I strongly believe that if I had had kids, I would not have been the artist that I am, which probably would have made a lot of people happy. But I've made some unique contributions that would not have been possible. And I even think like, because I had to justify this to a Jungian once, I was like, you know, and he, it sounds pathological to a lot of people. A woman who doesn't want children, a woman who's not attracted to children, a woman who kind of recoils from babies. It's like, that's messed up. Like that woman's a psycho. But I just frame it as I was an artist. Like I knew on some deep level that I did not have the ability to do the art things that I was destined to do if that energy was going into raising children. It's not trivial for a woman. I see women just fall in love. You're supposed to fall in love with your babies.
Yeah.
And that's how the babies survive. And I knew a couple artists who, when they were young, they had children and they abandoned their children. And they both told me that if they hadn't abandoned their children, they would have killed themselves. You know, they had to make art. These were people I knew in New York City. And I'm just like, that's a horrible tragedy. And it's just messed up on all levels. And it's a very good thing that I knew that I didn't want children.
That's fascinating, Nina. That's really interesting. And I've got 4 kids. I have 2 that I had, as I said, really young, 19 and 21. Then I had my other 2 when I was 34 and 37. So there's a big gap in between. And during that in-between time, I felt like that. Like my best friend was trying to get pregnant. And I was like, ugh, never. I actually had a brief second marriage that ended because I didn't want more kids. I loved my daughters. I was raising my daughters, but I had no desire for babies at all. It was repugnant to me to think about a baby. When my best friend was trying, I just thought, I cannot imagine wanting to hold a baby. Like it's so fascinating. This is really interesting. I wonder if any work has been done to study these impulses in us, because it felt it was insurmountable. There would have been nothing you could have done to make me want to hold a baby or be around a baby during that time. And then later I had very strong desire, baby fever. And I would have had 3 or 4 more babies. I had ended up having 2, but I would have just gone on and been like this really prolific super mom because I had such intense baby fever. So it's really, and that feeling of falling in love with your baby, it's very primal. And it's not, I can imagine what would that be like if that feeling didn't kick in, because it wasn't a brain thing. It wasn't like, I want to feel this. It's a body thing. And just as that repulsion was also a body thing. So I can relate to that. Interestingly, even though I've got kids and I love being a mom, I can relate to both sides of that.
That is interesting. Yeah, I kept thinking, I heard so many stories where people women changed their minds. And I was just like, oh God, what if I changed my mind? I can't imagine it. It never happened. The best that happened, the closest to that happened was after I got my tubes tied when I was 33. I was slightly less triggered by babies, because before I was so repulsed by them, I would go to another room and cry. And after the tubal ligation, when it was like, this is never going to happen to me, I'm safe now, I'm cool, I could tolerate the presence of babies a little bit better. And then after menopause, it got a little bit easier too. I still don't like them. I'm still not attracted to them. But when I was young, it was just like, get me out of here, run the other direction. And if I had to stay there, I would just start. Yeah, it was awful. I really did not like them.
This requires a part 2. This is so interesting. So interesting. I never thought I would have kids. And then I married somebody with 2 kids. And then after that, I felt like, had I known how much I enjoy having kids, I would have had my own. But at the same time, I don't regret that I didn't, because at that time in my life, it was very good for me that I didn't, for a variety of really complicated reasons. So, but hey, is part of the reason why babies repulse you, is it their hands? Because their hands remind me of hermit crabs. Is that it?
No, although back to racism and white guilt, I have to say, Pale white babies are the grossest babies. They're like larvae, right? You can see their veins and stuff. It's creepy.
I'm going to try to find a picture of my babies.
They're like uncooked turkeys.
Good grief. I like babies.
That's good. I mean, really,
too.
like, thank God.
Oh,
I like
Yeah.
some of them. Some of them I think are really cute. For the most part, I'm a little like, it's mainly the little crab hands.
Ruined it for me.
They have lots of fluids. The fluids are gross.
you know what's interesting is like that when you have a little baby, there's an amount of someone else's body fluid that you can stand to have on you and walk around in the day. That's a weird thing.
As long as it's the baby, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's
as long as it's
that's
the baby.
love. Because, you know, even adult heterosexual love, it's
Mhm.
pretty gross, really. You need all those hormones making you bond to the other person to tolerate
Yeah,
that.
that's true. That's true. Clem62 says that's why she likes Benjamin. What?
I don't know what that means exactly,
don't
but it's
either.
funny.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with you, Jen. This deserves a part 2. And I am looking for a picture of my babies.
I'm sure they're very cute
Yeah, they're cute.
with their throbbing little veins right below the skin. You can see.
Yeah. Yeah, my son does have that. Okay, here's a picture. He wasn't a baby here, but there.
Aw.
Yeah, that's
Aw,
cute.
That's very cute.
Yeah.
Hey, then too, like when they don't have any hair.
Palate
Like,
cleanser.
He's past the uncooked turkey phase of development, so
Yeah,
he's
that's
okay.
That's true. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's so interesting what that have you ever been with someone, but this like 2 minutes left, but have you ever been with someone in a romantic relationship and you fall out of love? Have you ever experienced the falling out of love, and that kind of like the person that you were almost physically addicted to previously, now you want them as far away from you as possible? That's a very primal thing. I can imagine that applies to babies for the same reasons. Like this, you know, there's something pheromonal or hormonal or something going on that makes us want that other the way that we want them, the way that we need them. Like, imagine moms smelling their babies, just like you want it almost. You hear moms all the time saying they just want to eat them. Because they do. I mean, they don't want to physically like devour, but they want to get that person, you know, to be in. It's this like really physical connection that transcends just holding someone's hand or standing next to them. It's like being in love in that way. When you're really in love and you have that chemistry, you want to be really right up there with that person. And when it's not there, it's like, could you pay me to do that? You couldn't pay me to do that.
I hope moms don't fall out of love with their babies the way that women fall out of love with men and vice versa.
Well, it sounds like those artists you talked about felt sort of that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know how they could have done. I mean, my guess is that they didn't bond in the first place. My guess, because that I have heard of. I've heard of just not bonding the way that you're supposed to, and postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And all that. But I think that really, the bond between a mother and her child is this profound lifelong thing, even when they hate each other, like even when they're so messed up in the head, you know, that they screw each other up irredeemably, there's still that primal bond.
Jeffrey Fildy says the baby head smell is a drug. Yeah, that's what it feels like. I think you're supposed to lose that physical feeling as your kid gets older. To some extent,
separate,
you know?
right?
Well,
Else
you
it'd
don't want to
weird,
be.
right?
Your kid doesn't want you sniffing them all the
Oh my
time when they're
gosh, can you
teenagers. I
imagine?
mean, that starts to get creepy.
Yeah.
See, now a dog, you can always sniff them, however old they are. And I'm always sniffing my dogs. They smell so good to me, especially when they're napping. They put out this scent that smells like a corn chip. So I'm always sniffing at them when they're sleeping.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Corn
I have
chip dogs.
I have two lovely cats, and I am
Aw.
very maternal towards them. So
Mhm.
I know that I have the wiring that was designed presumably to have the babies, but something got a little connected weird. It only works for
Mhm.
cats.
You know, and that might go into, if we did discuss this again, it's not a new thought, but how some of this sort of woke over feminization of the culture may be that there are a lot of single women with instinct, whether it's to a pet or it's like, oh, I'm a teacher and now all these children are mine in my class, or oh, those poor marginalized whomever. Oh, I don't know if we could ever know. There's not a controlled experiments of a bunch of, what if they were married? Or maybe you could, I don't know if you could sort that out, but I do wonder if that isn't a factor in some of the overly like unhealthy caretaking attitudes that single women might be having in their political lives.
Yeah, I've heard Jordan Peterson mention that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's rankling, but it's like, yeah, I think he may have a point there.
At least a little bit.
Right. I think he's right. There's this whole book about it in a different voice, I think by Carol Gilligan, I want to say, but I might have her name wrong, where she talks about females viewing morality specifically in terms of needs being met, because we are designed to meet needs. So if somebody's needs aren't being met in our brains, that's almost like it's immoral. The highest moral is to meet those needs. So women, I think, are particularly vulnerable to falling in with critical social justice ideas. Oh, well, these people, I'm being told they're oppressed. They have needs, they have unmet needs. Therefore, this is terrible and this must be fixed. And we want to do it now through policy.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a fascinating concept, and I've heard that as well. And it rings true. I'm really curious to discuss that in more detail if you guys want to do that.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you, Nina, for joining us today. And thanks for this great conversation.
This has been super fun. Thank you all.
Yeah, it's a delight. I hope everybody has a good week. Thank you for everyone who joined us in the chat, and